He kicked her food bowl across the concrete floor, like she was something less than human. Kang Min-jae didn't even look at her when he did it. He was on the phone, laughing at something, one hand adjusting his cufflink while the metal bowl skidded into the darkness and the thin broth inside it spread across the cold floor. 12 days she had been down there. 12 days without a window, without a clock, without anyone who knew her name or cared whether she was breathing. And this man in his $3,000 suit couldn't be bothered to look at her, while he took away the only thing standing between her and slow starvation. Zuri Bennett pressed her back against the wall and watched the broth soak into the cracks. She didn't cry. She had run out of tears around day 5. If you have ever felt completely invisible, like the world could swallow you whole and nobody would notice the empty space you left behind, then you already know exactly what Zuri felt in that basement. And if you haven't, count yourself lucky, because some people spend their entire lives fighting just to be seen. Before we go any further, if this kind of story moves you, if you've ever rooted for someone the world forgot about, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. Drop a comment and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Every single comment matters to me. Now stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about power, dignity, and what it truly means to be rescued. The last thing Zuri remembered clearly, from the night her life split in two, was the smell of expensive cologne and the sound of ice clinking in crystal glasses. It had been a Friday. Late. The kind of late where the legitimate staff had all gone home, and the people left behind were the kind you didn't make eye contact with. Zuri was supposed to have finished 2 hours earlier, but her supervisor had called in sick, and somebody had to deal with the third floor 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a billiard room that smelled like spilled bourbon and poor decisions. She didn't mind the overtime. She needed the money. That was always the math. She needed the money, so she stayed. She needed the money, so she didn't complain when the schedule changed without notice. She needed the money, so she swallowed the embarrassment of men in expensive suits looking through her like she was furniture. You learn to make yourself small when you need the money. You learn to disappear. Zuri was good at disappearing. It was in the hallway between the billiard room and the private study when she heard the voices. 2 men, one of them Min-jae, though she didn't know his name yet, was speaking in a low, tight voice that didn't match the laughter she'd heard from him all evening. The other man kept saying yes, just yes, over and over, like a man who understood that his job was to agree and nothing else. Zuri should have turned around. She would replay that moment for the rest of her life. The exact second she paused, the exact second something in her brain said, keep moving, and something else said, wait. She didn't consciously decide to listen. It was more like her feet forgot what they were supposed to be doing. She heard numbers, large numbers. She heard a name she recognized from the news, a city councilman. She heard the word cousin, spoken with a particular kind of contempt that people usually reserve for enemies. And then she heard Min-jae say, very clearly, in the careful English of a man who wanted no misunderstanding, by the time Do-yun figures out what's missing, we'll already own the vote. Her phone was in her apron pocket. She had it out before she fully understood why. She recorded 47 seconds. That was all. 47 seconds of her thumb pressed against the screen in the dark hallway, barely breathing, before Min-jae opened the study door. He saw her immediately. Zuri ran. She made it to the stairwell. She made it halfway down the first flight, before 2 of his men appeared below her, turned. Min-jae was already at the top of the stairs, and there was nothing in his expression that frightened her, not anger, not surprise. What frightened her was how calm he was. Like this was simply a problem presenting itself, and problems had solutions. I need that phone, he said. Zuri threw it, not at him, over the railing, straight down into the dark gap between the flights of stairs. She heard it hit something on the way down. She didn't know if it survived. She didn't know if the recording survived. But Min-jae didn't know either. That uncertainty was the only thing that kept her alive for the next 12 days. He had her moved 3 times in the first week. Different basements, different chains, same concrete smell and same bare bulb overhead. Zuri marked the days by counting the meals, except the meals came irregularly, sometimes twice in a day, sometimes once every 30 hours, and she eventually stopped trusting her count. She was cold most of the time. The chain on her ankle was long enough to let her reach the corner they'd left a plastic bucket in, and short enough to remind her constantly that she was not going anywhere. The first 2 days she spent trying to work out the bolt in the wall. By day 3, her fingernails were broken down to the skin, and the bolt hadn't moved. Min-jae visited 3 times. The first time he was almost polite about it. He sat in a folding chair several feet away from her and explained the situation the way a banker might explain a loan. He needed the recording. He needed to know if she'd sent copies to anyone. He needed these things badly enough that she was still alive, and he needed her to understand that the alternative to cooperation was something she did not want to experience. Zuri told him she'd already sent copies to 3 different people. She hadn't. She'd had approximately 45 seconds with the phone before she threw it. But he didn't know that, and the bluff was all she had. Min-jae studied her for a long time. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and left without another word. The second visit was shorter. He was angry about something, not at her, specifically. It felt like residual anger from somewhere else that he was carrying into the room. He demanded the names of who she'd sent the recording to. Zuri gave him 3 fictional names with enough detail to sound real. He left again. The third visit was when he kicked the food bowl. He wasn't there to interrogate her this time. He was there to demonstrate something. That he could do it. That she had no recourse. That the distance between a woman like her and a man like him was so vast and so absolute that common decency didn't even enter the equation. Kicked the bowl. He laughed at something on his phone. He looked at her, once finally looked directly at her and said, "We'll revisit this tomorrow." Then he left. Zuri sat in the dark and thought about Miss Loretta. Loretta Gaines was 68 years old and had a bad hip and a laugh that could fill a room. She had taken Zuri in 11 years ago, when Zuri was 17, and had nowhere to go, not as a charity case, not out of pity, but because Loretta had looked at this young woman standing on her building's front steps with a garbage bag of clothes and said, "You look like you haven't eaten since Tuesday. Come inside." Just like that, no application, no conditions. Just come inside. Zuri had slept on Loretta's couch for 6 months before Loretta insisted she take the second bedroom. She had eaten at Loretta's table, borrowed Loretta's library card, sat in Loretta's kitchen at 2 in the morning when the nightmares from before got too loud to sleep through. Loretta never pushed, never pried. She just made sure there was always food and always light and always someone who would answer if Zuri knocked. When Zuri finally got steady work, the cleaning company, the endless shifts, the grinding routine of other people's messes, she moved into her own apartment. But she still called Loretta every morning, still came for dinner on Sundays, still sat in that kitchen and felt something she couldn't articulate anywhere else. Loretta's hip had been getting worse for months. The medication was expensive. The specialist appointments were expensive. Everything was expensive, and Loretta's fixed income didn't stretch the way it used to. Zuri had been covering the difference quietly, without making it a conversation, because that was the only way Loretta would accept it. Lying on the basement floor, Zuri did the math. If she disappeared long enough, Loretta would run out of medication. That was the thought that broke something open in her chest. Not fear for herself, not anger at Min-jae, just the specific terrible arithmetic of what her absence would cost the woman who had given her everything. She started planning then. Not escape the chain made that impossible, but she started thinking about what she knew, and what Min-jae didn't know she knew. She started building something inside her head, the way you build things when you have nothing else to do with your hands. She was in the middle of that building, 12 days in, broth on the floor, darkness on all sides, when the building above her started shaking. It was the doors first, not knocking, impact, the sound of something hitting wood with enough force to rattle the frame. Then voices, multiple voices, professional in the way that had nothing to do with police and everything to do with men who moved through spaces like they owned them. Zuri pressed herself into the corner. Gunfire. 3 shots, then a pause, then 2 more. Not close. Somewhere above her and to the left, which her mind had mapped out as the main entrance corridor. More crashing. Something heavy falling. Then silence. It stretched for what felt like several minutes, but was probably 30 seconds. In that silence, Zuri was very aware of the fact that she was chained to a wall in an unmarked basement in a part of the city where nobody was looking for her, and whoever had just broken through the doors upstairs was not necessarily better than whoever had put her here. The basement door opened. The light from the stairway hit her like a physical thing. She had to turn her face away, eyes burning. She heard footsteps on the stairs. More than one person, but the first set stopped halfway down, and only one pair of feet continued to the bottom. When Zuri's eyes adjusted enough to see, she saw a man. He was tall, not dramatically so, but tall in a way that took up space. 40, maybe a little older, with the kind of face that had been weathered by things that weren't weather. He was wearing a dark coat. He was wearing a cut, and he'd come through what was clearly a violent situation upstairs without a single visible scratch on him, which told her something about either his skill or the precision of the men he brought with him. He was looking at her chain before he was looking at her face. Han Do-yun had come to this building because his surveillance had traced one of Min Jae's secondary operations to this location. He had come for evidence of the financial scheme his cousin had been running behind his back for the better part of 2 years. He had come because the betrayal was large enough to demand a response and small enough that he wanted the facts in hand before he made it. He had not come for this. He crouched down, actually got down to her level, which was not what she expected, and looked at the chain on her ankle. His expression didn't change much, but there was something in the stillness of his face that felt like a controlled reaction to something that had genuinely disturbed him. "How long?" he asked. Zuri's voice came out rougher than she intended. 12 days. He didn't say anything to that. He turned his head and called up the stairs in Korean. One of the men came down, carrying a toolkit. It took them 4 minutes to get the bolt out of the wall, not because they were slow, but because they were careful not to jerk the chain and hurt her ankle in the process. Nobody touched her without asking first. That was the detail that broke through the wall she'd been building around herself for 12 days. Not the rescue, not the light, not the fact that the chain was finally off her leg. The fact that the man crouching in front of her, in a basement he'd entered expecting to find evidence and instead found her, had thought to ask. Do-yun shrugged off his coat and held it out. He didn't drape it over her. He held it out and waited. Zuri took it. He helped her stand. Her legs weren't working properly. The circulation had been compromised long enough that standing was a negotiation. Her body was losing. Do-yun steadied her without making it a performance. Just a hand at her elbow, supporting weight, moving toward the stairs at whatever pace her legs could manage. Outside, the night air hit her like something she hadn't known she'd been missing. She stood on the step for a moment and breathed, just breathed. The city was out there, somewhere beyond the dark tree line, all its noise and light and ordinary human business carrying on without her, and she was breathing air that wasn't recycled basement cold. Do-yun waited. When she finally moved toward the car his men had brought around, he walked beside her. Not ahead, not behind, beside. She slept for most of the drive. She didn't mean to. She was determined, not too determined, to stay alert and orient herself, and think about where she was being taken, and what it meant, and whether she was trading one cage for another. All of that was reasonable. All of that was intelligent. Her body simply stopped participating in the plan, somewhere around the 3rd mile, and pulled her under. When she woke, the car had stopped. She was still wrapped in Do-yun's coat, and the car was parked in front of something large and lit, and close to water she could smell the lake before she could see it. A woman was waiting at the entrance, older, Korean, with a practical face and careful eyes. Do-yun said something to her in Korean that Zuri didn't catch, and the woman nodded and looked at Zuri with an expression that was not pity, exactly, but something adjacent to it. "I'll take you to a room," the woman said. "There's food if you want it. Hot water. Whatever you need." Zuri looked at Do-yun. He was several feet away, already in conversation with one of his men, a phone at his ear. But he caught her looking and stopped talking. "You're not a prisoner here," he said. "I'll explain everything in the morning. Sleep first." Zuri wanted to say something sharp to that. Something that made clear she wasn't just going to take a man's word for the nature of her situation, because he used the right tone of voice. She had spent 12 days at the mercy of a man who also used the right tone of voice. But her legs hurt. Her wrists hurt. She was so hungry the edges of her vision had been soft for days. She followed the woman inside. At the door, she stopped and turned back once. "Who are you?" she asked Do-yun. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face, not discomfort, not calculation. something closer to honesty than she expected. The wrong answer to a problem that was never yours, he said. Zuri stared at him. Then she went inside. She ate until her stomach protested. She bathed until the water went cold. She lay down on a bed that was softer than anything she'd slept on in years, and she stared at the ceiling and turned over everything she knew. The man who had found her was not a police officer. The men who moved with him were not law enforcement. The way he navigated that basement, the efficiency, the authority, the complete absence of surprise at the violence upstairs, none of that belonged to the legitimate world. She had been chained in that basement by a criminal. She had been freed from it by a different one. And somewhere out there, Loretta was alone, with a bad hip and medication running low. And Zuri was lying in a stranger's bed, wrapped in a coat that smelled like cedar and something colder she didn't have a name for yet. She should have been afraid. She was. Underneath everything, the fear was still there, crouched and patient. But there was something else underneath that, something she hadn't felt in 12 days. Something that felt like she might still have a move left to make. She was already awake when the knock came. Not the light knock of someone uncertain. 3 short raps, evenly spaced, the kind that assumed you were awake, because the person on the other space had been up for hours. Zuri had been lying on her back, staring at the ceiling since before dawn, cataloging everything she knew and everything she didn't, running the numbers the way she always ran numbers, when her situation was bad and getting worse. She got up. Her ankle was still tender where the chain had been. She found clothes folded on the chair near the door, plain her approximate size, nothing that announced itself. She put them on and opened the door. It was the woman from last night. In daylight, she looked sharper. Late 50s, maybe 60, with short hair gone mostly gray and hands that had worked hard for a long time. "Mr. Han would like to speak with you," the woman said. "When you're ready. There's no rush." Zuri looked at her. "What's your name?" "Helen." A brief pause. "I've worked for this household for 19 years. Is that supposed to reassure me?" Helen considered that. "No," she said. "I suppose it's just a fact." She turned toward the hallway. "Breakfast is ready. I'll tell him you'll come down when you're ready." Zuri followed her immediately. Not because she was ready, because waiting would only confirm she was afraid. Do-yun was already at the table when she came in, a cup of coffee in front of him and a phone face down beside it. He stood when she entered, which was not what she expected, and gestured to the chair across from him, which was also not what she expected. She sat. Helen set a plate in front of her rice, eggs, something with vegetables, and Zuri ate a few bites before she said anything, because she was still hungry enough that politeness was going to have to wait. Do-yun watched her eat without comment. He didn't look away, but it wasn't the look of a man enjoying a spectacle. It was the look of a man assessing a situation he hadn't planned for. "The man who held you is my cousin," he said. "Kang Min-jae." Zuri set her fork down. "I know who he is, you know his name." "I know more than his name." Do-yun's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind his eyes sharpened. He picked up his coffee, took a drink, set it down. "Then you know what you recorded." "I know what I heard. I know enough to understand why he couldn't let me go and couldn't kill me. Because you might have already sent the recording somewhere." "Did I?" He looked at her. A long, flat look. "I don't know. That's part of what I need to understand." Zuri leaned back in her chair. The tenderness in her ankle was a constant low-grade reminder of where she'd been 12 days ago, and she let herself feel it deliberately. Kept her focused. "So you need something from me?" "Yes." She appreciated that he didn't dress it up. "And in exchange? Protection. Resources. Whatever Miss Loretta Gaines needs." He said the name carefully, watching her reaction. "Hip replacement, according to the medical records. 3 months past the recommended window, because the cost was prohibitive." Zuri went very still. "I want to be clear about something," Do-yun continued, his voice staying level. "I'm not threatening her. I'm telling you that I already know about her, which means Min-jae already knows about her. That is the threat. I'm not it. You looked into Loretta. I look into everything. You looked into an elderly woman who has nothing to do with any of this, and you're presenting it to me over breakfast like it's a reasonable thing to have done. I'm presenting it because you need to know the full scope of what you're inside. Whether I looked into her or not, Min-jae already has the same information. Probably more. He's had 12 days to gather it while you were in that basement." Zuri stared at him. She hated that he was right. She hated more that she could feel the truth of it settling into her chest like a stone dropping into still water. "Tell me everything," she said. He did. Not all at once, he moved through it in pieces. The way someone does when they've been sit with information long enough to know which order it needs to be delivered in. Min Na-jae had been skimming from the organization's revenue streams for 14 months. Slowly at first, amounts small enough to disappear inside the normal variance of illegal financial operations. Then larger, then systematic. He'd recruited 6 of Do-yun's lieutenants, not the senior ones, but the ones 2 steps below, men in the ambition corridor where loyalty gets expensive. The councilman Zuri had heard mentioned was named Alderman Trace Whitfield. Min Jae had been cultivating a relationship with him through intermediaries for 8 months, working toward a zoning vote that would legitimize the transfer of 3 properties Do-yun, technically owned through a shell company, transfer them directly into Min Jae's private holdings. Not a coup with guns, a coup with paperwork. He was going to own buildings that you own, Zuri said. He was going to own the legitimate side of buildings I own, which is the more valuable side, increasingly. And then what? He just has his own operation? He'd have the money, the property, the men he'd already turned, and enough leverage over Whitfield to keep expanding. Do-yun's jaw moved slightly. Min Jae is patient. He would have waited another year after that before making any formal move. He understands that patience is the thing I would least expect from him. Why? Because he's never shown any before. Zuri looked at him. There was something in the way he said that, not bitterness, but the particular tiredness of someone who has been watching a person they know fall apart in slow motion and couldn't figure out how to stop it. She filed that away. The recording, she said. What exactly was on it? His voice. Whitfield's name. The phrase about the vote. Do-yun paused. Enough to establish intent. Not enough on its own, but enough to pull on the thread until the rest of it comes loose. And you need the original, because if copies exist in the wrong hands, I lose control of where this ends. A recording like that doesn't just damage Min Jae, it damages everyone adjacent to him. He looked at her directly, including me. There it was, the thing underneath the thing. So this is still about protecting yourself. It's about controlling the damage. He didn't flinch from it. I won't lie to you and call it altruism. Zuri picked up her fork again. She ate in silence for a moment. Across the table, Do-yun waited, which was starting to seem like something he was genuinely good at. The recording is safe, she said finally. I'm not telling you where yet. I know. And I need to see Loretta. I'll arrange it today. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you I'm going. He looked at her. Something shifted in his face, not irritation. Sups. Something that might have been the opposite of irritation, though she couldn't have named it precisely. I'll have someone drive you, he said, and someone stay outside her building. That's going to frighten her. Plainclothes. She won't know. Zuri studied him for a long moment. Why did you carry me out of that basement? Question landed in the silence between them and sat there. Do-yun's hand rested flat on the table. He looked at it for a second before he answered. Because I found a person who needed to be carried, he said. And I could. It was not the answer of a man performing generosity. It was the answer of a man who had surprised himself and was being careful not to think about it too hard. Zuri finished her breakfast. Loretta took one look at Zuri and grabbed her face with both hands. 2 weeks, she said. Her voice was doing something complicated. 2 weeks, Zuri. I called everyone I could think of. I filed a report. They told me adults go missing all the time, and she was probably... She stopped, pulled Zuri into her arms. You're cold. It's not cold outside. I'm fine, Miss Loretta. You are not fine. You look like you haven't eaten since. She pulled back and looked at her, and then she looked past her at the car sitting at the curb and the man leaning against it in ordinary clothes, trying to look like a man who wasn't watching anything. Who is that? A friend of a friend. Zuri Bennett. It's a long story. Then come inside and start talking. They sat in Loretta's kitchen at the same table where Zuri had sat 100 times before, and Zuri gave her a version of the truth, not all of it. Not the parts that would make the older woman's blood pressure do something dangerous, but enough. Min Jae, the recording, the basement, the rescue. She did not say who had rescued her. Loretta listened without interrupting, which was unusual. Her hands were folded on the table, and she was very still in the way that Zuri recognized as the stillness of someone absorbing something they don't want to absorb. When Zuri finished, Loretta was quiet for a moment. "And now?" Loretta said. "Now I figure out the next move." With the man in the car outside, Zuri didn't answer. "Baby," Loretta said slowly, "that car is worth more than this building. He has money." "What kind of money?" Zuri met her eyes. Loretta read the answer there and made a sound that wasn't quite disapproval and wasn't quite acceptance. Something caught between them. "Are you safe?" Loretta asked. "Safer than I was 3 days ago." "That's not the same thing as safe." "No," Zuri agreed. "It's not." Loretta looked at her for a long time. Then she stood and went to the stove and started making tea, which was what she did when she needed her hands to be doing something, so her mind could work without interference. "Your wrist?" she said, not turning around. Zuri looked down. The left one still had a faint discoloration where the restraints had been. She hadn't noticed she was rubbing it. "I'm okay," she said. "Stop saying that, Miss Loretta. You were chained in a basement for 12 days by a criminal, you were rescued by a different criminal, and you're sitting in my kitchen telling me you're okay." Loretta turned around. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was entirely steady. "You're allowed to not be okay." Zuri opened her mouth. Closed it. "I know," she said finally, and her voice cracked on it in a way she hadn't let it crack since the day she was taken. And Loretta came back to the table and sat down and put both hands over hers and didn't say anything else. They sat like that for a while. Do-yun was waiting in his study when Zuri got back. He had 3 phones on the desk and a man named Ji-ho standing near the window. Park Ji-ho, head of Do-yun's security, who had the face of someone who assessed threat levels as automatically as breathing. Ji-ho looked at Zuri the way he looked at everything. "Measuring," Do-yun said. "Not a command. Just an offering." Zuri remained standing. "What happened while I was gone?" "2 things." Do-yun set one of the phones down. "First, Vernon Pike." She knew that name. Her jaw tightened before she could stop it. Vernon Pike owned the cleaning company she'd worked for. 3 years of back-to-back shifts, 2 years of wage discrepancies she could never prove were intentional. One incident in front of clients that she still woke up from some nights, Vernon standing over her in the hallway and saying, "Don't get above yourself, sweetheart," while the people she was cleaning for laughed at their own conversation and paid no attention. "What about him?" she said flatly. "He's been laundering Minjai's money through the company accounts for 22 months. Cleaning business is partially a front." Do-yun's voice was even. He knew exactly who his high-value clients were. He was paid to staff those events with workers who were likely to cause trouble if something went wrong. Zuri stood very still. "He set me up. Not deliberately. You were simply available. The wrong shift, the wrong floor." A pause. But he knew the risk he was exposing his workers to by taking those contracts. She thought about the 3 years, the exhaustion, the way Vernon would schedule her for the worst shifts without explanation and then smile at her in the parking lot like he was doing her a favor by giving her hours. The missing wages she'd tried to dispute twice and dropped both times because she couldn't afford a lawyer and couldn't afford to lose the job. "What happens to him?" she said. Do-yun looked at her. "That depends partly on what you want." She hadn't expected that. "Excuse me? You worked for him. He put you in proximity to Minjai's operation without warning you. You were the one harmed." He said it plainly. "I'm asking what you want." Zuri's first instinct was something visceral and angry that she recognized as honest and also recognized as not actually what she wanted. She thought about it for a real moment. "I don't want him hurt," she said. I want it on record what he did. The wages. The laundering. I want it to not just disappear because someone like you decides to handle it quietly." "Understood." "That's it? Understood?" "His financial records are already with people who will find what they're looking for," Do-yun said. "It will look like a routine audit triggered by an anonymous tip. His accounts will be frozen within the week. The wage discrepancies will come out as part of the broader investigation." He paused. "His name will be in documents, public ones." Zuri exhaled slowly. Something loosened in her chest that had been tight for 3 years. She didn't celebrate it. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like the absence of a weight she'd gotten so used to carrying that she'd almost stopped noticing it. "You said 2 things," she said. Do-yun's expression shifted. "Just slightly." That was the tell. She was starting to learn with him. The tells were small. Min-jae has filed a civil complaint through a proxy, naming you as the perpetrator of a series of thefts from clients over the past 18 months. The air in the room changed. Excuse me, Zuri said softly. Forged documentation. Witness statements from 3 individuals, presumably paid. Do-yun's voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. Reports to 2 local news outlets suggesting a pattern of targeting wealthy households. The story hasn't run yet. He's building the release. Zuri's hands were flat at her sides. She was breathing through her nose because if she breathed, she wasn't sure what would come out. He's going to put my name in the news, she said, as a thief. He's going to try to make you untouchable. Anyone who helps you becomes someone helping a criminal. Anyone who takes your side looks like they're defending the indefensible. Ji-ho, near the window, spoke for the first time. It's a containment strategy. Shut up, Zuri said. Not at Ji-ho specifically. At the situation. At the careful, patient cruelty of it. She walked to the window and stood with her back to both of them for a moment. Outside, the lake was doing what it always did, indifferent and enormous, and moving whether anyone watched it or not. She had spent her entire adult life in the negative space of other people's plenty. She had cleaned their houses and fixed their messes and sounds like been invisible in their hallways. And the one thing she'd held on to through all of it, the one thing poverty couldn't take, and bad bosses couldn't take, and chain in a basement couldn't take, was that her name was clean. That was hers. That was the thing nobody had managed to take yet. Can you stop it? She asked. Her voice was flat. I can dismantle it, Do-yun said. The witnesses can be exposed. The forged documents have inconsistencies we can exploit. The media contacts can be reached before the story runs. A pause. It won't be invisible. There will be noise. But my name, there will be retractions, corrections. The story that runs eventually will be different from the one he's building. He was quiet for a moment. I won't pretend that kind of damage repairs itself completely. Turned around. Do-yun was watching her with that particular stillness of his, not detached, not cold, but contained, the way someone contains something they don't entirely know how to put down. Why does this make you angry? She asked. He frowned slightly. What? You're angry. She studied him. Not about the recording, not about Min-jae's scheme. You're angry about this specifically. Why? A long silence. Ji-ho looked at the floor. Because it's calculated to destroy something that can't be rebuilt the same way, Do-yun said finally. Property can be recovered. Money can be recovered. A reputation. He stopped. My cousin understands exactly what he's attacking. Zuri looked at him for a long moment. There was something under all of it, the expensive house, the controlled voice, the men who moved precisely because he expected precision, something that she didn't have a name for yet, but could feel the shape of. She looked at Ji-ho. You said containment strategy. Is that what he usually does? Contain threats? He's done it before, Ji-ho said carefully. When a situation becomes complicated, he removes the complexity. The simplest way is violence. But when violence creates problems, he uses paper. Zuri nodded slowly. She was building something inside her head, the same instinct that had kicked in on the basement floor, the one that kept running calculations when the rest of her wanted to stop. I want copies of everything, she said. Every piece of documentation he's filed. Every statement. All of it. Already in progress, Do-yun said. I want to see it myself. She looked at him directly. Not a summary. Not what Ji-ho thinks is relevant. Everything. He held her gaze. All right. She moved toward the chair then and finally sat, and the 3 of them began working through it. The documents spread across the desk. Ji-ho pointing out inconsistencies in the witness timelines. Zuri catching a detail in the 3rd statement that both men had missed. The supposed theft had occurred on a date when the client's household records showed no cleaning service had been scheduled. A date she hadn't been anywhere near the property. He didn't check the calendar, she said. Do-yun picked up the page. Looked at it, no. He was in a hurry, she leaned back. Which means he's not as patient as you think he is. Do-yun set the page down slowly. Something crossed his face that might have been the beginning of something that wasn't entirely professional. He looked at her, the way people look at something they weren't expecting. No, he said quietly. He's not. The nights were the problem. During the day there was work to do. and Zuri had always been better with work than with stillness. During the day, she could read documents and find inconsistencies, and have conversations that required her full attention, and eat meals at regular intervals, and feel, if not safe exactly, then at least occupied. At night, the basement came back, not as memory, exactly, more as physical fact. Her body remembered what her mind was trying to process: the cold concrete, the specific smell of standing water and damp wood, the way the darkness in that room had its own texture, almost tactile against her eyes. She'd wake up with her heart running at a sprint, and her hand reaching for a chain that wasn't on her ankle, and have to lie there cataloging the differences. Soft mattress, clean air, no chain, door unlocked. She hadn't tested the door that first night. She tested it the second. It opened. The hallway beyond it was lit by low sconces and completely empty. She stood in the doorway for a full minute, watching nothing happen, before she went back inside. She didn't tell anyone about the nightmares. She didn't intend to. On the fourth night, she came out of one of them badly, genuinely disoriented. Halfway across the room, before she knew she was awake, her breath coming in the shallow, rapid rhythm that she recognized even as she was in the middle of it as panic, not danger, though her body was not interested in the distinction. She opened her bedroom door because she needed to see an open space, and not four walls. Do-yun was in the hallway, not waiting outside her door. He was further down, near the window at the end of the corridor, standing with his arms at his sides, looking out at the lake. He turned when he heard her door, and they looked at each other across the length of the hall. He didn't come toward her. He didn't say anything. He just turned back to the window. Which was the least intrusive thing he could have done, and left the hallway open between them. Zuri leaned against her doorframe and breathed. After a minute, her heart rate started to come down. After 2 minutes, she said, "Do you always stand in hallways in the middle of the night?" "Rarely sleep well," he said without turning around. "Never have since when?" A pause. "Since I was 17. She didn't push on that. She stood in her doorway until her breathing was fully normal, until the basement was properly behind her, and the hallway was just a hallway. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She went back inside. She slept until morning. The morning Jiho found the leak started like every other morning and ended like nothing that had come before it. Zuri was in the study going through another stack of documents when Jiho came in. He closed the door behind him, which was not his habit. Do-yun looked up from the phone call he was on and ended it without explanation. Jiho's face was professionally neutral, which Zuri had come to understand was the face he made when something was genuinely bad. "Someone inside the estate has been communicating with Minjai's people," Jiho said. "For at least 9 days. Do-yun went very still. "Confirmed," he said. "Confirmed." "Who?" Jiho looked at the floor for exactly 1 second, and that 1 second told Zuri everything about how much he didn't want to say the next thing. "Helen," he said. The name landed in the room like something physical. Zuri watched Do-yun's face. She watched him take the information in, process it, and not flinch from it, and then she watched him do something she didn't expect. He looked, for just a moment, like a man who had been hurt. Not angry, hurt. The distinction was significant. Her grandson Jiho continued. "Minjai's people have the boy. Threatened the child if she didn't cooperate." He paused. She didn't intend to pass along anything critical, but she mentioned Miss Gaines. During one of the check-ins, the room was completely silent. Zuri stood up slowly. "He knows about Loretta," she said. Jiho didn't answer. He didn't need to. She looked at Do-yun. His jaw was tight, and his hands were flat on the desk, and everything about him was controlled in the specific way of a man, controlling something that very much wanted not to be controlled. "I need to go to her," Zuri said. Do-yun started. "Now," Zuri said. "Not in an hour, right now." Do-yun stood. He picked up his phone and made a call in Korean. Fast, 4 sentences, and then looked at Jiho. "The grandson. Find him tonight." Jiho nodded and was out the door before Zuri had her jacket. She was already in the hallway when Do-yun caught up with her. He didn't grab her arm. He walked beside her, matching her pace, and said quietly, "We'll get to her. You should have had more people on her building. Yes, you said she was covered." She was. It wasn't enough. His voice was flat with the weight of it. "I know." They moved down the stairs and through the entrance and into the car, And Zuri sat in the back seat, with her hands pressed together, between her knees, and thought about Loretta's kitchen, and the tea going cold on the table, and the particular vulnerability of someone who had no idea that they were inside someone else's war. The car was 40 minutes out when Do-yun's phone rang. He answered, listened, said 3 words in Korean that Zuri didn't know, but didn't need to know, because she could read the answer in the way his whole body went rigid, and then carefully, deliberately, went still. He ended the call. He looked straight ahead through the windshield for a long moment. She's gone, he said. Min-jae has her. Zuri heard her own breathing in the silence. How long ago? She said. Her voice was very quiet. Less than an hour. She looked out the window. The city moved past at the pace of late evening traffic, ordinary and indifferent, all its ordinary lives stacked up alongside each other, with no idea what was happening inside this car. Loretta Gaines, 68 years old, bad hip, a laugh that could fill a room, was somewhere out there in the dark, inside someone else's war, because Zuri had been in the wrong hallway at the wrong time, and a man named Min-jae had decided that patience was a weapon, and everyone Zuri loved was a target. Do-yun said her name. Zuri turned to look at him. We will get her back, he said. I need you to stay with me. She looked at him for a long time. The anger was there, enormous, specific, pointed. The fear was there too, crouched beneath it, and underneath both of those, something else, the same cold calculation that had kept her alive for 12 days in a basement, when other options ran out. Then drive faster, she said. The car hit 70 on the expressway, and nobody told the driver to slow down. Zuri sat in the back seat, with her hands pressed flat against her thighs, and watched the city lights blur past Phnom Fourteen, and did not allow herself to think about Loretta in any specific way, because specific was dangerous right now. Specific meant the kitchen. Specific meant the bad hip and the way Loretta moved through her apartment with the careful economies of someone who had learned to manage pain without complaining about it. Specific would break her open, and she could not afford to be broken open yet. So she kept it abstract. Loretta had been taken. That was a fact. Facts were workable. Facts were the material you built things from. Do-yun was on his phone for the entire drive, speaking in low, rapid Korean. She caught a few English words woven through warehouse, waterfront, confirmed, not yet, and she built a partial picture from them, the way she'd built partial pictures from fragments her entire life, assembling meaning from the edges because the center was never given to her directly. Ji-ho called twice. The second call made Do-yun go silent. For a long moment, phone pressed to his ear, eyes on the back of the driver's headrest. Yes, he said finally, just that. He hung up. Zuri looked at him. Min-jae has made contact, Do-yun said, through an intermediary. He wants a meeting. When? He hasn't specified yet. Do-yun's voice was careful. He wants us to wait for his terms. He wants us to sit with it, Zuri said. He wants us to spend tonight, imagining what he might do to her. He's buying himself time and spending our nerves. Do-yun looked at her. Yes. So we don't wait. We don't have a location yet. Then we find one. She turned back to the window. How many people does he have left? After your operation at the building where he kept me. 12 that we've confirmed. Possibly more we haven't. And you? Enough. She turned back to him. That's not an answer. Enough to do what needs to be done, he said. That's the only answer that matters right now. They sat in silence for the rest of the drive, not the comfortable silence that had occasionally settled between them in the study. This was the silence of two people, holding something between them that was too large and too sharp to put down. Do-yun's estate at night had a different quality to it. During the day, it was a place that happened to be large. At night, with men moving through it in the particular way of people preparing for something, it became what it actually was, a command center wearing the skin of a home. Ji-ho met them at the entrance. He had a tablet in one hand and the expression of a man who had been awake for 30 hours and expected to be awake for 30 more. He fell into step beside Do-yun immediately, and Zuri walked on Do-yun's other side, and nobody questioned her presence there, which she noted. Why? They went to the study. The desk had been cleared and replaced with a map of Chicago's waterfront districts, annotated in both Korean and English. 3 of Do-yun's men were already there, standing in the specific way of people waiting to be told what to do next. We have partial satellite data from 3 warehouses Min-jae has used previously. Jiho said, setting the tablet on the map. 2 are confirmed inactive, too much foot traffic in the surrounding blocks, too much exposure. The 3rd, he tapped the screen. Industrial waterfront. Calumet area. The surrounding infrastructure is decommissioned. Minimal civilian activity after 9 p.m. That's where he'll take her, Zuri said. Jiho looked at her. It's one possibility. It's the only one that makes tactical sense. He wants a controlled environment for the exchange. He wants limited exit routes so he can monitor approaches. He's used the location before, which means he's comfortable there. She looked at the map. He'll pick the place he knows. Do-yun was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Jiho, surveillance on the Calumet property. Immediately, Jiho was on his phone before Do-yun finished the sentence. Zuri studied the map. The waterfront district was a long strip of industrial real estate that the city had been trying to redevelop for 15 years without success. Warehouses, loading docks, access roads that wound between structures that had been built before anyone thought about sight lines or civilian safety. She had cleaned offices 3 blocks from there once. She knew what the area looked like at night, how the light fell, and where it didn't, how sound carried off the water. If he's waiting for us to come to him, she said slowly, that means he thinks he controls the terms. He does control the terms, one of Do-yun's men said. His name was Sung. She'd learned that much in the past few days. He has leverage. He thinks he has leverage, Zuri said. There's a difference. Do-yun looked at her. Go on. He wants the recording. He wants me. He wants both of those things badly enough to kidnap a 68-year-old woman he has no use for otherwise. She kept her eyes on the map, which means Loretta is only valuable to him as long as we're afraid to act. The moment we stop being afraid to act, she becomes a liability. The room was quiet. She's right, Do-yun said. So we have a window, Zuri continued, between when he expects to hear from us and when he decides we're not cooperating. We need to use that window. We don't have the location confirmed. Sung started. Then confirm it. She looked up from the map. What do you need? Sung looked at Do-yun. Do-yun's expression said the question had been directed at him, and he should answer it. Eyes on the ground, Sung said, reluctant. Someone to physically confirm activity at the Calumet property without triggering Minjai's perimeter. Zuri looked at the map again. What would Minjai's people be watching for? Vehicles. Known faces. Anything that looks organized. What about a woman walking her dog? The room was quiet again, but differently. Do-yun said no. It's 11 p.m. There are residential blocks 3 streets over from the access road. Women walk dogs at 11 p.m. You've been inside one of Minjai's operations before. If anyone recognizes you, he had 12 people at the building where he kept me. Of them are out of the picture. The other half don't know what I look like in normal clothes with normal hair. I was a woman in an apron. I was furniture. She looked at Do-yun directly. I was invisible. That's still useful. Do-yun's jaw tightened. This is not a negotiation. No, she agreed, it's not. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. The silence in the room stretched. Jiho looked at his phone, looked up. Something in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. There's a development, he said. Minjai's terms arrived at 11:47 p.m. Not through an intermediary, through Helen. The old woman came into the study with red eyes, and her hands clasped in front of her, and she stood in the doorway and could not look at Do-yun directly. And Do-yun looked at her with an expression that Zuri could not fully read, except that it did not contain what Helen was clearly bracing for. He called my cell, Helen said. Her voice was barely holding. He said, to give you the message directly. He said you'd know it was real because of something only I would know. She stopped, pressed her lips together. He said to remind you of the birthday in Busan. 1999. Something moved through Do-yun's face. Gone quickly. But it was there. What does that mean? Zuri asked, quietly. Do-yun didn't answer immediately. It means he has access to information that should have died with my father, he said finally. It stopped. It confirms it's him, not a proxy. And the message? Jiho said. Helen unclasped her hands and clasped them again. He wants Zuri, and the original recording. He'll make the exchange at the Calumet warehouse he gave the address. She looked at Zuri for the first time. Tomorrow night, 10 o'clock. He said come alone or he starts sending pieces of the old woman back before midnight. The last words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them, and had to force them out all at once. Nobody moved. Zuri felt the room from a distance. The way you feel a room when your body is present and your mind is somewhere else doing the math, running the numbers, building the thing you build when everything else stops working. Loretta, alone somewhere in the dark, bad hip. No medication. Pieces. She pushed that word into a box and locked it. He said one more thing, Helen said. She was looking at the floor now. He said to tell Do-yun that he found something else when he had me. Something Zuri left behind. Zuri went cold. What Do-yun said? A phone number, written on paper inside a book in her room here. Helen's voice dropped further. A number she called the first week she was here, when she thought everyone was asleep. The room turned slowly, like a ship changing course. Every face in the room angled toward Zuri. She felt it happen. She felt the temperature change the moment the attention shifted. Felt the sudden reconstruction of every interaction they'd had. Saw it happening in real time in Jiho's eyes, and in the careful stillness of Sung's shoulders, and in the way the other men near the wall recalibrated their proximity to the door. Do-yun looked at her, not accusatory, worse than accusatory. He looked at her the way someone looks when they are genuinely trying to understand something and genuinely afraid of the answer. Zuri, he said, quiet, who did you call? She held his gaze. An attorney. Which attorney? A woman named Sandra Fitch. She does civil rights law. She's not connected to any of this. She's not connected to Min-jae. She's not connected to you. She doesn't know anything beyond the fact that I contacted her and told her I was in a complicated situation and asked to hold something for me. What did you ask her to hold? Zuri breathed in. A copy of the recording. The silence was complete. I duplicated it, she said. The first night I was here. I used a device I asked Helen to bring me from my room. I told her it was a personal item. She didn't know what it was. She looked at Helen. She genuinely didn't know. Helen's eyes were wet. She nodded once, barely perceptible. Zuri looked back at Do-yun. I wasn't going to hand it to you without having something in reserve. I didn't know you. I didn't know what you intended. I needed something that wasn't inside your walls. Do-yun was very still. You've had a copy outside this estate since the first week, he said. Yes. With an attorney whose identity Min-jae now has. The words landed. Zuri felt it happen, felt the full weight of it, the cascade, the way one true thing followed from another. The phone number on paper, Helen's check-in call, Min-jae's people, and the name Sandra Fitch, moving through their network like a stone dropped in water, the ripples already traveling faster than she could see. He has her name, Zuri said. It wasn't a question. If he has the number, yes. Jiho's voice was flat, not cruel, just flat with the weight of a fact. He'll have the identity within hours if he doesn't already. Do-yun turned away from her. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room, and she could see the set of his shoulders contained, rigid, the precise posture of a man refusing to let something out. Jiho, he said, Sandra Fitch, tonight. Already on it, Jiho said and stepped out. Zuri's legs were not entirely steady. She sat down in the chair nearest to her because not sitting down would have required energy she was currently spending on other things. She had planned for this. She had planned for the possibility that Do-yun was another cage. She had planned the way you plan when you have nothing, and the only currency available is information. You divide it, you distribute it, you make sure that no single person can take all of it at once. She had not planned for Helen's check-in call. She had not planned for Min-jae to be looking for exactly that kind of thread. She had not planned for Loretta. Helen was still in the doorway. Zuri looked at her, this woman who had been with Do-yun for 19 years, who had cried over the phone to a man who had had her grandson, who had not known what she was carrying. Helen, Zuri said. The older woman flinched slightly. I don't blame you, Zuri said. Helen looked at her. Her face crumpled briefly and then steadied. She nodded and left the room without another word. Do-yun turned around. He looked at Zuri for a long time. She sat in the chair and looked back and did not look away and did not apologize, because she wasn't sorry for surviving. She was only sorry for the collateral of it. You should have told me, he said. I know. Not as a recrimination. As a if I had known, I could have... He stopped. Sandra Fitch could have been better protected. I know, she held his gaze. I'm telling you now. He sat down, not at his desk in the chair across from her, the one that made them level. Does the copy she holds have enough? It has the same 47 seconds as the original. With the metadata intact, she paused. But Min-jae doesn't know what she has. He knows she exists, and he knows I contacted her. He doesn't know the specifics. He'll assume the worst. He'll assume she has everything, which means she's a target, whether or not he knows exactly what she holds. Do-yun rubbed a hand across his face. The gesture was so ordinary, so completely ordinary and human, that for a moment Zuri forgot where she was and who she was looking at. The exchange, she said. He wants me and the original. You're not going. I know you're going to say that. I'm saying it. And I'm telling you that you saying it doesn't change the math. She leaned forward. He has Loretta. He has a threat against Sandra Fitch. He has 12 people, possibly more, and a location he controls. What do you have? More than 12 people. Who he knows about. Who he's been watching through Helen for 9 days. She watched that land. She watched him absorb the full scope of what 9 days of eyes inside his estate meant. He knows your team. He knows your vehicles. He knows Jiho's face. He's been planning for the version of this where you come in with force. Do-yun was quiet. He hasn't been planning for me, she said. Because a woman like me, a housekeeper, a nobody, someone who was just in the wrong hallway, doesn't walk into a situation like this on purpose. Can't model that. It doesn't fit his picture of how things work. Walking into that warehouse alone would get you killed. Not alone, she met his eyes, but I walk in first. I give him something to look at while you establish position. I buy time. She paused. We control the terms by making him think he does. Do-yun stood up. He turned away again. Which she was starting to understand was what he did when he needed to think and couldn't afford to let his face do the thinking for him. She waited. You said we, he said. I said we. He turned around. You're not a soldier. No, I'm better. She held his gaze. I'm someone he already underestimated once. He doesn't know. I've had 3 days to study everything you know about him. He doesn't know I've been paying attention every single time you've explained how he thinks. She let that settle. He thinks he's holding a maid. He is not holding a maid anymore. The room was quiet. Then Do-yun said something that surprised her. He said, You're right. Not immediately after. Not easily. He said it someone says a thing, the way someone a thing, when they've run every other option and found them all insufficient. But we plan it together, he said. Every detail. Nothing improvised. Agreed, and if the situation changes at any point, I signal and pull back. I know. He looked at her for a long moment. Seeing. There was something in his expression that she was starting to be able to read the specific texture of it when he was trying to keep something back that was pushing to get through. I need to tell you something, he said. She waited. The birthday in Busan that Min-jae mentioned. 1999. He sat back down. He looked at his hands, then at her. My father died that year. In Busan, Min-jae was there. I was not. A pause. There are details about how my father died that have never been documented anywhere. Things only someone present would know. He was very still. Min-jae mentioning that context was a message. Not about logistics. Zuri studied his face. He's telling you this is personal for him too. He's telling me he has things he can say. About my father. About how the organization was built. Things that would cost me regardless of whether they're true or not. He's collecting weapons, she said slowly. He's been building this for longer than 14 months. Yes, she absorbed that. The patience of it. The particular kind of patience that comes not from discipline but from grievance. From a man who had been measuring a debt for years and had finally decided to collect. Do-yun, she said. How long has Min-jae believed the organization should have been his? Question sat between them for a moment. Since my father chose me, he said. 23 years. 23 years. She thought about carrying something for 23 years. She thought about what that kind of weight did to the shape of a person, how it bent things that might otherwise have grown straight. He's not going to trade Loretta, she said, even if I give him everything he asks for. Do-yun met her eyes. No, he never intended to. No. She breathed through that. Let it be what it was without trying to make it smaller. So the exchange is a trap. From the moment he proposed it. And you were going to tell me this when? I'm telling you now. You should have led with it. Yes, he said. I should have. She stood up. She walked to the map on the desk and looked at it. Calumet waterfront, the access roads, the sight lines. She stood there long enough for the shape of it to become familiar. long enough for the distances to stop being abstract. We need the real evidence out of Sandra Fitch's hands before tomorrow night, she said. If Min Jae reaches her first, Jiho is already moving. And we need a copy secured somewhere he absolutely cannot reach. Where, she thought about it. Somewhere inside a system that doesn't belong to either of you. She looked up. A journalist. Do-yun blinked. Just once. If a journalist has it, running becomes impossible for Min Jae. Not just legally, publicly. He can survive criminal proceedings for years. He cannot survive a news cycle. She held his gaze. It also means you can't bury it either. The silence stretched. You want insurance against me too, he said. Yes. He looked at the map for a moment. Then at her. Something crossed his face that she still didn't have a complete name for something that ran underneath the professional layer of him, closer to the surface tonight than it had been before. All right, he said. She nodded. She turned back to the map. Behind her, Do-yun was quiet for a moment, and then he said her name. The way he said it made her turn around. After this is over, he said. His voice was careful with it. There are things I need to say. Things that aren't, he stopped. Tried again. Things that don't belong inside a plan. Zuri looked at him across the desk, across the map with its annotated streets and its measured distances and its version of tomorrow that might or might not hold. After, she said. He nodded. She turned back to the map and started building. The call came at 3:14 a.m. Jiho's voice, clipped and stripped of everything except information. Sandra Fitch is not at her home address. Neighbors say she left 2 hours ago with a bag. No car. Zuri was already dressed. She had not slept. She ran, Do-yun said from across the room. She ran, Jiho confirmed. Which means she knew someone was coming. Which means she had a protocol, Zuri said. Both men looked at her. I told her, Zuri said. The first call when I gave her the recording. I told her, if anyone contacts you about this or approaches your home or office, do not wait. Leave and take it with you. She felt the memory of that conversation 3A. Sitting on the floor of her room in Do-yun's estate, her voice barely above a whisper, the strange, desperate clarity of a woman who had just been unchained and was already planning for the next chain. She's not running from us. She's running to somewhere safe. She has the copy. Where? Jiho said. I don't know, she looked at both of them. That was the point. I don't know and I can't be made to say. Jiho looked at Do-yun. Do-yun looked at Zuri. She looked back at him, and something passed between them that was too complicated for the middle of the night. Something that acknowledged the full scope of what she was, what she had done, what it meant that she had built this much redundancy into a plan that she'd made alone in a borrowed room, because she was not yet sure the man who rescued her from one chain wouldn't simply offer her another. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned to Jiho and said, Good. Then Min Jae can't reach it either. We move forward. He picked up the map from the desk and spread it flat again. Tomorrow night, 10 o'clock. We have less than 19 hours. Zuri stepped up beside him. She placed her finger on the Calumet warehouse. Here's what we're going to do, she said, and she began to talk, and neither man interrupted her. And outside the window, the lake moved in the dark, without caring about any of it, and the clock ran down towards something none of them could fully see. But all of them were now committed to walking into. 19 hours is a long time when you have nothing to do, and a short time when you have everything to do. Zuri slept for 3 of them. Not because she decided to, body simply stopped to her body, simply somewhere around 4:30 in the morning, pulling her under mid-sentence while she was reviewing the warehouse schematics. Jiho had sourced through a contact at the city planning office. She woke up in the chair with a blanket over her shoulders that she hadn't put there herself, and daylight coming through the study windows at a low, gray angle. Do-yun was at his desk. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. He had a coffee waiting for her on the side table. She drank it without comment. He didn't make anything of the blanket, and she didn't ask. They worked through the morning. Jiho brought the surveillance report at 7. The Calumet warehouse had confirmed activity. 2 vehicles entering after midnight, at least 4 individuals visible through long-range optics. Property matched what Min Jae's message had described, and it matched the tactical profile Zuri had laid out the night before. Min Jae had chosen his ground carefully. She had to give him that. The warehouse sat at the end of a service road that ran parallel to the waterfront for roughly 300 yards before dead-ending at the building's loading bay. Two entrances, the main bay doors facing the road, and a secondary access door on the south face that the city plan showed had been added during a 1987 renovation. The roof had a deteriorating skylight structure that Jiho's contact described as structurally unreliable but technically passable. The surrounding area was open industrial wasteland for 200 yards in every direction except the waterfront side, where the dock infrastructure created natural cover. Natural cover. That was the thing they were building from. The plan as Zuri had laid it out was not complicated. Complicated plans failed at the joints. The more moving pieces, the more places for things to go wrong. She had learned that not from any military training or any criminal education, but from 3 years of cleaning large private properties with a 2-person crew and a 4-hour window, which turned out to share more with tactical planning than anyone had ever bothered to tell her. Strip it to the essential problem. Identify the constraints. Work from what you have, what they had. Do-yun's people establishing position in the dock infrastructure south and east of the building, approaching by water to avoid the road where Min-jae would have eyes. Jiho taking the roof approach with 2 men once Zuri was inside and attention was focused inward. Sung and a second team holding the service road for the exit. 2 vehicles, engines running, 300 yards back from the building. What Zuri had, herself. A wireless transmitter the size of a shirt button, a decoy drive containing a partial and corrupted version of the recording that would take Min-jae's people approximately 8 minutes to identify as non-functional, and 19 hours of listening to Do-yun explain exactly how his cousin thought. The transmitter was the debate that ate 2 hours of the morning. Do-yun wanted an earpiece so he could talk to her inside the building. Zuri said no. If he searches me, and he will search me, an earpiece ends everything before it starts. Transmitter is passive. It only sends. It's small enough to survive a physical search if it's placed correctly. She had looked at Do-yun steadily. I'll know what I need to know before I walk in. Once I'm inside, I'm the only one who can read the room. If something goes wrong before we breach, then I handle it. She hadn't let him finish. The exchange for being inside. I handle what happens until you're in position. That's the deal. Do-yun had not liked it, but he'd agreed which she was learning was a significant thing that he could be argued with, that he could hear a position and revise his own without needing to perform the revision as victory. It made him easier to work with than most people she'd encountered, which was a low bar, but still. The transmitter went under the left sleeve of her jacket, taped flat against the inside of her wrist. Sung tested the signal range 3 times. It held at 400 yards, which gave Do-yun's team enough latitude to establish their positions before she entered. 2 in the afternoon, Do-yun pulled her aside. Not into the study. Out to the back terrace, overlooking the lake. The day was overcast, the water gray and restless, the air carrying the particular cold of late autumn in Chicago that got into your bones before you noticed it happening. He stood beside her and looked at the water. I need to say something, he said. She waited. If this goes wrong tonight, he stopped. Started again, more carefully. If the situation inside becomes untenable before we breach, I need you to use the transmitter signal to abort. 3 double clicks. Jiho knows what that means. We come in immediately regardless of position. If you come in early, Loretta, is my responsibility. He said it with a weight that she understood was not performance. You are also my responsibility. Both things are true simultaneously. He looked at her for the first time since they came out. I won't choose the operation over the people inside it. Zuri looked at him. The lake moved behind him, gray and enormous and indifferent, and this man stood in front of it in his dark coat and said that and meant it in a way that she could feel, not because she was naive, not because she'd stopped being careful, but because she had spent enough time in close proximity to people performing sincerity to know the difference between performance and the real thing. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated. Like the word had weight. They stood there for another moment. She was aware of him beside her, in a way that she'd been keeping peripheral for days, pushing to the edge of her attention because the center of her attention had more urgent occupants. Now in this narrow pocket of quiet before the thing they were walking into, she let it be what it was. After, she said quietly. He nodded. After, they went back inside. At 7 p.m., Zuri's stood in front of the mirror in her room and looked at herself. She had chosen the clothes deliberately, not the professional clothes she'd been given access to in the past few days. Not anything that belonged to Do-yun's world. She wore dark jeans, a plain gray sweater, her own jacket, the one that had been in her room here, since Jiho's team had retrieved some of her things from her apartment in the first week. Worn at the elbows. Real. She looked like what Min-jae expected her to be. A housekeeper. A nobody. A woman in the wrong place who had never been in the right place and knew it. She looked at herself for a long time. Then she buttoned her jacket and went downstairs. The service road to the Calumet warehouse was 2.5 miles of broken asphalt lit by onions except the ambient glow of the city on the underside of the clouds. Zuri rode in the back of a nondescript sedan with a driver named Park who said nothing for the entire 20-minute trip and kept his eyes ahead. Do-yun was already in position. He had left 2 hours earlier by water with Jiho and 6 men. Sung's team had taken the road 40 minutes ago in unmarked vehicles now parked in the dark 300 yards from the building. Zuri was the last piece. She felt the transmitter against her wrist as the car slowed. The button tape was secure. She pressed it once experimentally and heard nothing. That was the point. The signal went out, but she received nothing back, and the absence of sound was what she had to trust. Park stopped the car 200 yards from the building and looked at her in the rearview mirror. You don't have to, he started. I know, she said. She got out. The air hit her immediately. Cold, wet off the water, carrying the smell of rust and old industrial grease and the particular emptiness of places that used to mean something. She could see the warehouse ahead, a long, dark structure, the loading bay doors, lit by a single working floodlight above the entrance. 2 figures visible near the doors. She was too far to see their faces. She walked toward them. Her footsteps on the broken asphalt were the only sound for 100 yards. Then she heard the water off to her left, the dock, the slow movement of the lake against the pilings, and she knew that sound meant Do-yun's team was somewhere in it, moving through the dark, below the level of the dock. And she focused on that, instead of the 2 men who were now watching her approach, with their hands at their sides. One of them spoke Korean into a phone. The other one watched her walk. She stopped 10 feet from them. I'm here, she said. Just that. The one on the phone said something and listened. Then he gestured toward the door. She went in. The inside of the warehouse was larger than the schematics had conveyed. The ceiling was 40 feet up, and the floor was 200 feet of cracked concrete interrupted by support columns and the detritus of whatever operation had last used. The space rusted shelving units, the frame of a disassembled conveyor system, cardboard that had gotten wet and dried into hard shapes that nobody had bothered to remove. 2 additional lights had been set up inside. Temporary work lights on stands, the kind that construction crews use, casting a harsh white circle in the center of the space and leaving everything beyond that circle in relative darkness. Loretta was in the center. She was sitting in a metal chair, her wrists tied to the armrests, with something Zuri couldn't identify from this distance. She was upright, breathing. Her head came up when Zuri came through the door, and something moved across her face, relief, terror, and anger, all at once in the specific combination of someone who loves the person arriving and desperately wishes they hadn't arrived. Baby, Loretta said. Her voice was rough. No, Zuri. You should not be here. I know, Zuri said, and kept walking toward her. Stop there. Min-jae's voice came from the right, from the dark beyond the lights. She stopped. He stepped out of the dark the way people do when they've planned the entrance unhurried, letting the moment work for him. He was wearing a suit even here, which told her something about him that she'd already known. The performance himself was non-negotiable regardless of setting. He had 2 men behind him, and she could see the edges of 2 more near the south wall without looking directly at them. People, including Min-jae. Possibly more in the dark. He stopped 12 feet away from her and looked at her, the way he'd looked at her in the basement, like a problem presenting itself. Like she was still the housekeeper in the wrong hallway, still the variable he needed to neutralize. You look better than the last time I saw you, he said. Lower bar, she said. Something flickered in his expression. Not amusement. Something closer to the recalibration of a man encountering something he expected to be less than it is. The drive, he said. She reached into her jacket pocket and held it up. A small USB drive, black, unremarkable. He looked at it. On the floor, he said, "Slide it to me." "Not yet." His jaw tightened. "You slide me Loretta first," Zuri said. She walks to the door. "Then you get the drive." "That's not the arrangement." "The arrangement doesn't work for me." She kept her voice flat, even. The way she'd kept it flat in the basement, when flat was the only thing she had. "You get the drive when she's at the door. That's the only way this happens." Min-jae looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her, toward the door she'd come through, and she knew he was calculating, reading the fact of her arrival on foot, the single figure walking up an empty road, the absence of vehicles. He was confirming she'd come alone. She let him confirm it. "You really came by yourself," he said. There was something in his voice. Not respect, surprise maybe, or its cousin. "I came for her," Zuri said. "That's it. I don't want a war. I don't want to be inside any of this. I want the woman in that chair, and I want to walk out of here, and I want the rest of it to be between you and your cousin. And Do-yun just lets you go? Lets the recording go. What Do-yun wants isn't my problem." She looked at him steadily. "He rescued me from a basement. I didn't ask him to. I don't owe him my life." Min-jae studied her. She could feel him running the calculation, this woman, this housekeeper, standing alone in his warehouse at 10 o'clock at night, with a USB drive and a claim of independence from the man who ran the organization. It was almost plausible. It was almost exactly the kind of thing a desperate person who had nothing and wanted nothing except escape would do. "The drive first," he said finally. "Then the old woman." "That's not what I said." "That's what's happening." She didn't move. Min-jae looked at one of the men behind Loretta. The man put a hand on the back of the chair and tilted it slightly. Not enough to endanger Loretta, enough to make the threat's direction clear. Loretta's breath caught. Zuri's hand tightened around the drive. "All right," she said quietly. She crouched down. She set the drive on the concrete. She slid it across the floor toward him, not all the way to his feet, but to the edge of the light. He didn't move to pick it up. He gestured to one of the men behind him, who came forward, crouched, took the drive, stood, handed it back. Min-jae turned it in his fingers. "I'll need a few minutes to verify," he said. "I know." He looked at her. "You know. That's how I do it," she said. "Make sure it's real before completing the exchange." "Smart." She held his gaze. "Go ahead." He watched her for another moment, and then he handed the drive to the second man, who moved toward a laptop set up on a folding table at the edge of the light. Zuri watched this without expression. The man plugged in the drive. The screen lit up. 8 minutes. That was what she needed. 8 minutes for Min-jae's people to determine that the drive contained a partial, corrupted file that looked, on initial inspection, like a genuine recording, distorted, yes, but potentially damaged in transit. 8 minutes for them to go back and forth about whether it was the real thing and what the distortion meant and whether it was salvageable. She pressed the transmitter twice, the first signal. Do-yun's team was 300 yards out. Jiho needed 6 minutes to reach the roof. She needed 8. "I heard you were patient," Zuri said to Min-jae. He looked at her. Do-yun said it. That patience was the thing he'd least expect from you. She kept her voice conversational, light, exactly as if she were not counting seconds. He said it almost like a compliment. Something moved in Min-jae's face. Did he? Surprised me too. He doesn't give compliments easily. She glanced at Loretta, alive, steady, watching her with the focused attention of a woman who trusted her completely even without knowing why she should. Then back to Min-jae. "He said you'd been building this for a long time." 23 years, Min-jae said. The words came out with a weight they'd clearly been carrying for exactly that long. "That's a long time to wait for something you think is yours." "It was mine." His voice dropped, not louder. Quieter, which was worse. "My father built the foundation. My grandfather built what the foundation sat on. Do-yun's father married into it, and his son inherited it, and what my family built got handed to someone who—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "He's a caretaker. He's always been a caretaker. He maintains. He doesn't build. And you would have built," Zuri said. "I would have expanded it into something they couldn't ignore." "Who's they?" He looked at her. Something shifted. He'd caught himself. She watched him recalibrate, pull back, remember that he was talking to a housekeeper, standing in his warehouse. The file, he said, to the man at the laptop. Still loading, the man said. There's something wrong with the format. Min-jae's eyes sharpened. He looked at the man, then at Zuri. She held his gaze. What did you give me? He said. The recording. What's wrong with it? I dropped the phone when I ran, she said. The file was on a damaged device. I copied what I could. She let a small crack appear in her composure. Just small enough to look real. If it's corrupted, that's not my fault. That's what I have. He took 2 steps toward her. The space between them collapsed from 12 feet to 7. She felt the change in proximity as a physical thing, the shift in the air, the way her body registered it as threat before her brain caught up. If you're playing me, he said quietly, I'm not. If you came in here with a decoy while my cousin sets up outside. I came here alone, she said. You watched me walk in. No vehicles, no backup. She held his gaze without blinking. I'm a housekeeper. I don't have an army. He looked at her for a long, flat moment. Then he turned to the man at the laptop. Can you recover it? Maybe I need more time. How much time? 10 minutes. Maybe 15. Min-jae turned back to Zuri. He was close enough now that she could see the particular qualities of his eyes, not cruel. Exactly. Certain. The eyes of someone who has committed to a version of events and organized his entire identity around it. Sit down, he said. I'll stand. It wasn't a request. I know, she said, and remained standing, because the 3 inches of height she gained from not sitting were the only ground she had, and she was not giving them up. He looked at her for another moment. Then he turned and walked toward the laptop without pressing the point, which told her something. He wasn't going to escalate over posture. He was saving his escalations for the thing that mattered. She pressed the transmitter once more. The second signal. Jiho should be on the roof. She breathed. She looked at Loretta. Loretta was watching her with that specific intensity, still, focused the way she got when she was solving a problem that everyone else had given up on. Her wrists were secured, but her posture was straight. Her chin was level. The hip had to be hurting. She wasn't showing it. Zuri had a flash of memory, sudden and uninvited. Loretta's kitchen, 3 in the morning, years ago, the 2 of them sitting with tea that had gone cold while Zuri talked about something. She couldn't even remember now. Some crisis that had felt enormous at 17s and had eventually resolved into background noise, and Loretta sitting across from her, with her chin resting on one hand, listening the way she always listened, like what you were saying, was worth the full weight of her attention. She locked that memory up. Later. How long have you known? Min-jae said. He was at the laptop now, looking at the screen. Known what? Zuri said. About Do-yun, what he does, what the organization is. He looked at her sideways. Before all of this. I mean, did you know who the client was when you were hired to clean those events? No. But you know now. I know enough. And you're still working with him. He turned to look at her fully. Why? Because he cut a chain off your ankle. That's part of it. A man does one decent thing. He's done more than one, she said. And then, because it was true, and because Min-jae was looking for leverage, and she was not going to give him the specific shape of anything that mattered. But that's not your business. Min-jae watched her for a moment. Something in his face shifted not to warmth, but to a kind of grudging acknowledgement. He likes you. She said nothing. I could see it when I had Helen's reports. The way he was moving resources, the old woman's medical care, the legal interference with your former employer, the amount of personal attention. He shook his head slightly. I've known Do-yun my entire life. He doesn't do things without reason. He doesn't spend resources without calculating the return. A pause. He's spending on you. You're looking for a weak point, she said. I already found it, he said it simply, without satisfaction. Like a man stating a fact he'd been carrying for a while. I'm not going to use it the way you think. The back of her neck prickled. What does that mean? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. And then Min-jae said something she was not ready for. I'm going to let the old woman go, he said, right now. I'm going to have her walk to the door, and I'm going to let her out. The room was completely quiet. Why? Zuri said. Because I didn't want her, he said. I wanted you in the recording. She was a means to get you here. He gestured to the man behind Loretta. The man began working on the restraints. She's 68 years old with a bad hip. She has nothing to do with this. You threatened to send her back in pieces. I threatened, he agreed. I didn't intend. Zuri watched Loretta's wrists come free. She watched Loretta stand slowly, carefully, the hip making itself known, and she watched Loretta look at her with an expression of complete refusal. "I'm not leaving you here," Loretta said. "Miss Loretta. No. You have to." "Zuri Bennett, I have not left you behind once in 11 years, and I am not starting tonight. Go." Zuri looked at her with everything she had, every bit of it. "Please, I need you to go. I need to know you're out of here." Loretta looked at her. The argument was still there. Zuri could see it, visible and enormous and fierce. And then Loretta looked at Min-jae and at the men around the room and at the door, and she did the same calculation Zuri had done and got the same answer. She moved toward the door, slowly, not without dignity. She walked with the careful deliberateness of someone managing pain without apology. At the entrance, she stopped. She didn't turn around. "You come back to me," she said. Her voice was very steady. "I know," Zuri said. Loretta went through the door. The sound of her footsteps faded. Min-jae watched this happen, and then turned back to Zuri with the expression of a man who has completed a transaction and is now ready to address the primary item on the agenda. "Now," he said, "the real recording." Zuri looked at him. "The drive I gave you is what I have." "No," he said, "it isn't." He reached into his jacket and produced a phone. He turned the screen toward her. "Sandra Fitch, currently in a vehicle on the 94 heading north. We've been following her since midnight." Zuri's chest went tight. "She didn't run far enough," Min-jae said. "She made a call at 7 this morning to a number registered to a Northside law office. We had the building covered by 8. He looked at the phone. "She's carrying the real copy. My people will intercept her in approximately 12 minutes. He lowered the phone. "Unless you tell me where the journalist copy is." The journalist copy. He knew about that too. Zuri stood very still inside the knowledge of how completely the situation had just changed. "You've been 3 steps ahead of this the entire time," she said quietly. "I've had 23 years to learn how to think around Do-yun," he said. "And you're not Do-yun." "No," she agreed, "I'm not." She pressed the transmitter 3 times. The abort signal. "Come in now." Min-jae's eyes went to her wrist. She saw him see it. Saw his expression change, not surprise. Recognition. The look of a man who had been waiting for this specific moment and had prepared for it. "He's already here," Min-jae said. He looked up, not at the doors, at the roof. Zuri followed his gaze and saw, in the deteriorated skylight structure above them, a shadow that should not have been there. And then Min-jae raised one hand, and all 4 of his visible men drew weapons simultaneously. From somewhere in the darkness above the lights, there was a sharp crack, and the skylight exploded inward, and then everything happened at once. Glass rained down in a shower across the concrete. One of Min-jae's men swung his weapon toward the roof and fired twice blind into the dark above the lights. Return fire came from 2 directions, east and south, and Zuri threw herself sideways behind the nearest support column as the space between the lights became a geography of sound and motion that was. Nothing like the movies, and everything like chaos. She stayed behind the column. Her heart was hitting her rib cage with the force of something trying to get out. She pressed her back into the concrete and breathed and thought, not panicked. The other kind thought about what she knew about the room. Column to her left, south wall 40 feet. The laptop table was between her and Min-jae. Min-jae. She looked around the column. He was moving. Not toward the fight, away from it. Back, deeper into the dark of the warehouse, toward the waterfront side, toward the loading door on the far wall that the schematic had shown, but that they had not covered because they had not thought he'd run. She went after him. Not a decision exactly. More like her body reaching the conclusion before her brain finished the argument. She crossed the open space between the column and the first shelving unit at a dead sprint, heard something hit the concrete near her feet without knowing if it was glass or something else. A sound like green reached the shelving unit and kept moving through the dark at the edges of the work lights, following the sound of Min-jae's footsteps ahead of her. He hit the loading door on the far wall and threw it open, and cold air came through in a rush. She was 6 feet behind him. He heard her, turned. For a moment they were both in the narrow space of the loading bay threshold, the dark waterfront behind, to him, and the chaos of the warehouse behind her, and there was nothing between them but the distance he was trying to maintain and the distance she was trying to close. "Stop," she said. Her voice came out rough with exertion. He looked at her. His composure was still there, battered, but there. "You cannot stop me," he said. "You're a housekeeper." "I was a housekeeper," she said. "I was invisible. I was furniture. I was the woman in the wrong hallway." She was breathing hard. "And I am the reason you are standing here with nowhere to go." He heard it in her voice. She watched him hear it, the difference between the woman he'd kicked a food bowl past in a basement and the woman standing in front of him now. Something shifted in his face. He reached into his jacket. Zuri had already moved. Not toward him, to the side, against the loading bay wall, giving herself the frame of the doorway as cover, and the move put her at the angle where what Min-jae pulled from his jacket pointed at empty air where she had been instead of where she was. He adjusted. She grabbed the edge of the loading door and drove it hard into his arm. The sound he made was involuntary. The weapon hit the concrete. She kept the door moving, full weight behind it, and Min-jae went back a step, and then another, through the threshold and out onto the dock, and she came through after him, and they were outside, in the cold and the dark and the smell of the lake. And behind her she could hear the warehouse, and ahead of her was the water, and to her left, along the dock structure, the sound of people moving. Do-yun's people, coming up from the dock. Min-jae heard it too. He stopped. He looked left. He looked at the water. He looked at Zuri. She stood between him and the door. "It's over," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The composure was still there, battered and genuine, and the most honest thing she'd ever seen from him, the face of a man who has carried something enormous for so long that putting it down might be the most physically difficult thing he's ever done. "The recording," he said. "Even if you release all of it. Copies. Everything. Do you know what you're also releasing?" He looked at her steadily. "What Do-yun's father did. What the organization did to build itself. The people it hurt. The names in those records that aren't just mine." "I know," she said. "And you still," she said. "Still." He breathed out. Just breathed out. Like something leaving. The dock filled with sound and motion on his left. 3 of Do-yun's men emerging from the dock infrastructure, weapons up, professional and quiet. Min-jae looked at them, looked back at Zuri, and then Do-yun stepped out of the dark beside his men. The cousins looked at each other. 23 years of it, all of it visible in the space between them. The specific, terrible geometry of 2 men who share blood and history, and a wound that never healed correctly. Min-jae said something in Korean. Quiet. Just to Do-yun. His voice was flat and tired, and entirely without performance. Do-yun listened. His face was still. Then Min-jae turned back toward Zuri, and for the first time since she'd walked into that warehouse, she saw something in his expression that wasn't calculation. "The old woman," he said. She's out," Zuri said. "She's fine." He nodded once. Like a man checking the last item off a list he'd been keeping. Do-yun moved toward his cousin, and one of his men moved with him, and Min-jae did not resist, which was the only surprise left that the night had. Zuri stood on the dock in the cold air, coming off the lake, and listened to the sounds from inside the warehouse resolve the voices, the movements, specific quality of a situation being brought under control, and she felt her legs begin to shake. Not from fear. From the sudden withdrawal of everything she'd been running on for the past 19 hours, the adrenaline and the calculation and the controlled terror of walking into a room full of men who wanted something from her and making them think she had nothing to hide. She sat down on the dock edge. She didn't intend to. Her legs made the decision unilaterally. The water moved below her, black and constant, and she pressed the heels of her hands against her knees and breathed until the shaking eased. Behind her, footsteps. Not cautious. Deliberate. Do-yun sat down beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. He sat close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cold coming off the water, and he looked at the lake, the way she was looking at the lake, both of them letting the night be what it was for just a moment, before the next thing started. "Loretta," she said. "Sung has her," he said. "She's safe." I'm told she is arguing with Sung's driver about where they're going." Something gave way in Zuri's chest. It came out as almost a laugh. "Almost," she said. "Roof landing was rough. He's annoyed about his jacket." A pause. "He's fine." She breathed. "Min-jae," she said, "in custody." He was quiet for a moment. "He didn't fight." "I know. I saw. Said something to me on the dock." Do-chun's voice was careful with it. He said he'd been angry. For so long, he couldn't remember what else he had. He stopped. He said it like it was a confession. Zuri looked at the water. Maybe it was, she said. Do-yun was quiet beside her. The warehouse behind them was full of controlled activity voices. Movement. The practical business of an operation concluding. The night was doing what nights did, moving toward whatever came next without waiting for permission. She was aware of his shoulder against hers. She didn't move away. You grabbed the loading door, he said. Yes, with your bare hand. Against a man with a weapon. It worked. It worked, he agreed, in the tone of a man who is choosing to let the argument go, because the outcome of the thing doesn't leave room for the argument. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her, not from the corner of his eye, directly, in the way he did when he'd stopped calculating, and was just being present for something. You said after, he said. I know. Is this after? She looked at him, at this man who had stepped out of the dark of a basement with a coat over his arm and crouched down to her level, and asked before he touched anything, who had sat in the hallway at 3 in the morning and turned back to the window, who had said, tell me what you want, when what she wanted was justice for a woman who stole wages and who nobody powerful had ever defended before. She was not naive, she knew what he was. She knew the machine he'd inherited and run, and the cost of it. She'd seen that cost in the faces of the men who served him, and in the careful ledgers of how power moved in the world he occupied. She knew that knowing him did not resolve any of that, and that whatever came after tonight would have to reckon with it honestly or not at all. She knew all of that. She also knew what it felt like to be invisible for 30 years and have someone see her. Ask me again when we're not sitting on a dock in the dark after a gunfight, she said. His mouth did something that was not quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood. Fair, he said. They sat on the dock, and the lake moved, and somewhere in the city, Loretta Gaines was in a car being driven to safety and arguing with the driver about it, and somewhere behind them Min Jae was in custody. And 23 years of accumulated grievance had finally found the end of its road, and the night was not over, but the worst of it was. And Zuri sat on the cold dock in the dark, and for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, she let herself just breathe. They processed Min Jae at a private facility on the north side that Do-yun used for situations that required discretion before they required law enforcement. That was how Ji-ho described it. Discretion before law enforcement. The phrasing was careful in the way that all of Do-yun's world was careful language shaped around the exact perimeter of what it was willing to acknowledge. Zuri sat in the back of the car on the drive there and didn't challenge the phrasing because she was too tired and because the outcome was what mattered and because she had learned, over the past several weeks, pick the arguments worth having and let the others go past. Min Jae sat in a green wood splitting. She couldn't see him as a separate vehicle ahead of them. She couldn't see him through the darkened windows, but she knew he was there. Knew it the way you know the weight of something, even after you put it down. The phantom presence of a thing that had occupied your attention for so long that its absence felt almost like sound. Do-yun was on his phone for most of the drive. Calls she didn't try to follow. She watched the city move past the window and tried to locate herself in the sequence of what had just happened. To put it in order, the warehouse, the dock, Loretta in the car ahead, Min Jae in custody, the recording existing in 3 separate locations now, none of which he could reach. Plan had held. Most of it. The parts that hadn't held she was still turning over, trying to understand where the gaps were and what they meant about the things she hadn't been able to see from inside her own calculation. Sandra Fitch, the tail on her vehicle. The 12 minutes Min Jae had mentioned before his people would intercept her. She looked at Do-yun. Sandra Fitch, she said. He lowered his phone. Ji-ho redirected the intercept, he said. She's safe. She's been moved to a hotel under a different name. Does she still have the copy? Yes. And the journalist? The file reached him at 9:47 this evening. Do-yun looked at her. Before we were in the warehouse. It's already in editorial hands. She absorbed that. So even if tonight had gone wrong, the story runs regardless, he said. Yes. She turned back to the window. Outside, the city did what it always did, continued. Indifferent. Its millions of ordinary transactions carrying on alongside the extraordinary ones without distinguishing between them. You moved it before I gave the signal, she said. I moved it when I determined that Minjai had more intelligence than we'd accounted for. He paused. The plan we built together was good. The situation changed. I adapted. You adapted without telling me. I didn't have a way to reach you. She looked at him. He held her gaze without apology and without flinching, which was the thing about him she had come to trust most. Not that he never made unilateral decisions, but that he didn't pretend he hadn't made them. Next time she said, "Find a way." "Yes," he said. "Just that." She turned back to the window. The facility was a converted commercial building, 3 floors, no signage, the kind of anonymous urban structure that exists in every large city and is invisible specifically because it looks like nothing in particular. They took Minjai to the 2nd floor. Zuri did not follow. She sat in a ground floor room with Loretta. Loretta was in a real chair with a glass of water and a blanket over her lap that she had not asked for but had not removed, which told Zuri something about the state of her. Her color was better than Zuri had expected. Her eyes were clear. The hip was plainly causing her difficulty. She held herself at a particular angle that minimized the weight on it, a posture Zuri had watched her develop over 2 years as the condition worsened, but she wasn't going to say so. "How long have you been sitting like that?" Zuri asked. "Like what?" "Like your hip is on fire, and you're hoping if you don't mention it, the room won't notice." Loretta looked at her, then looked at the wall. "Since yesterday afternoon," she said. "How bad?" "Bad enough." A pause. "It's manageable." "It's not manageable. It needs surgery that you've been putting off for 3 months. Because the cost was—" "It's not a cost issue anymore," Zuri said. Loretta looked at her. The look was complicated gratitude and pride, and something that pushed back against both of those things, because Loretta Gaines had been navigating this specific tension her entire life. The tension between needing help and needing to be the kind of person who didn't. "Zuri," she said carefully, "that man's money is being used to make things right," Zuri said. "That's all. That's the only category it belongs in. It's not that simple." "I know, it's not that simple." She leaned forward. "But your hip is. Your hip is simple. You need surgery. The surgery is accessible. And the only thing standing between you and it was money, and the money question is resolved." She held Loretta's gaze. "Let the simple thing be simple." Loretta looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across her face, the specific tenderness of a woman who raised someone without meaning to, and looked up one day to find the person they'd become. "You grabbed a loading dock door at a man with a gun," Loretta said. "Jiho's people were 30 seconds out. That is not the point I'm making." "What's the point you're making?" "That you scared me half to death." Her voice was very steady. "And that I'm extraordinarily proud of you. And both of those things are true at the same time. And I don't know what to do with that." Zuri sat with that for a moment. "Let it be what it was. You can start with the surgery," she said. Loretta made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but close. They kept Minjai for 4 hours. Not the kind of detention that involved coercion. "That much," Zuri confirmed with Do-yun directly, standing outside Sep's 2nd floor room with the door closed, and her arms crossed, and her voice at a level that left no room for interpretation. Do-yun looked at her and said the documentation was being compiled. The formal handover to law enforcement was being prepared, and the 4 hours was procedural, making sure the package delivered to the authorities was complete and irrefutable. "And his grandson," she said. "Helen's grandson." "Already with Helen," Do-yun said. "Last night, Jiho pulled him out of the property where Minjai had him before we went to the warehouse. She hadn't known that. You didn't tell me. I didn't want it to change your focus before you went in." He held her gaze. "I should have told you after. I should have told you on the dock." She looked at him. At the careful honesty of it, not an excuse, not a rationalization, just the plain acknowledgement of an error and the reason for it. "Is the boy okay?" she said, shaken unhurt. He paused. "Helen hasn't left his side." She nodded. She started to turn away. "Zuri." His voice was quiet. She stopped. "Minjai said something to me on the 2nd floor. He was choosing his words with the particular care of someone who has been carrying a thing for several hours and is deciding how to put it down. He said that the organization hurt people. Invisible people. People with no recourse." He paused. He said it as an accusation. He said it meaning that I was part of that. That the things I built, even the legitimate ones, were built on a foundation that cost people like... He stopped. "People like me," Zuri said. "Yes." The hallway was quiet. Somewhere below them, the building moved with the soft activity of people doing the practical work of the situation. Is he wrong? She asked. Do-yun looked at her. The full weight of the question and the full weight of his answer were both visible in the stillness of his face. No, he said, he's not wrong. She held his gaze. Then what are you going to do about it? He was quiet for a long moment, not the silence of someone avoiding a question. The silence of someone who has been doing the accounting for a while and is finally arriving at the number. I'm going to dismantle it, he said. The criminal operations. All of them. He said it the way you say a thing you've been working toward saying for a long time and aren't entirely sure of until it's out in the air. It will take time. It will create risk. Some of the people I've worked with for years will not accept it easily. He looked at her steadily. But I'm going to do it. Zuri looked at him. She looked at him for a long, real moment the way you look at someone when you're trying to see past the version of them they present and into the version they actually are. She believed him. Not blindly. Not because of the dock or the coat or the way he'd crouched to her level in the basement. She believed him because she'd watched him think for weeks now, and the way he thought told her something about where his decisions would eventually land. I'll want to see that, she said. Not the plan. The actual thing. The actual change. Yes, he said. I'm not going to take your word for it. I know. I'm going to be watching, Zuri. Something in his voice shifted. I'm counting on it. She looked at him for another moment. Then she went back to Loretta. The formal handover to law enforcement happened at 7 in the morning. Not dramatic, not cinematic. 2 attorneys, Do-yun's, and a separate independent counsel. Zuri had insisted on +2 federal investigators who had been building a parallel case against Min-jae's financial operation for 11 months and received the recording and supporting documentation with the controlled professionalism of people who have been waiting for exactly this and do not intend to show how much. Zuri sat in the room for the first hour. Then she stepped out because the procedural language and the carefully navigated jurisdictional conversation was making her head ache and she needed air. She stood outside the building in the early morning cold. The city was doing its morning things: commuters, delivery vehicles, the particular rhythm of a city of millions waking up and organizing itself for another day, without knowing or caring what had happened inside any of the buildings it surrounded. She thought about the 47 seconds. The recording that had started all of it. The thing she'd made in a dark hallway with a thumb pressed against a phone screen and no idea what she was building. 47 seconds that had cost her 12 days in a basement and weeks of fear and the particular exhaustion of being inside someone else's war. And that had also, she turned this over, carefully led her somewhere she wouldn't have arrived at otherwise. Into the company of a man she would not have met. Into a version of herself she hadn't known was available. She was not glad it happened. That was too simple and too false. The basement was real. The chain was real. The bowl kicked across the floor by a man who couldn't be bothered to look at her was real. None of that became acceptable because of what followed it. But she was here, standing outside a building in the early morning with clean air in her lungs and Loretta safe inside, and a man on the second floor beginning the practical business of the rest of his life. She was here, and that was not nothing. Ji-ho came out 15 minutes later. His jacket was replaced. The dock landing hadn't been kind to the previous one, and he moved with the slightly careful gait of someone managing something he wouldn't describe as an injury. They're nearly done, he said. How's the shoulder? He looked at her. What shoulder? The one you've been holding differently since last night. Pause. It's manageable. She almost laughed. You and Loretta should compare notes on what manageable means. Ji-ho stood beside her for a moment. He had the quality of someone who spent most of his time in rooms making tactical assessments and was slightly uncertain how to operate in the absence of an immediate tactical problem. She had come to find this oddly endearing. The reporter, she said. The journalist copy. When does that run? 48 hours, Ji-ho said. Maybe less. They're verifying now, does it? She stopped, considered the question. Does it implicate Do-yun? Ji-ho was quiet for a moment. It documents Min-jae's operation, he said carefully. The recording speaks to Min-jae's actions. The supporting documentation builds the case around those actions. He paused. There are references to the organization's structure that will raise questions about the organization overall, about Do-yun specifically. His name appears in documents. The context, Ji-ho looked at the street. His attorneys believe the exposure is manageable in terms of criminal liability. Civil and reputational, he stopped. Will be real, she said. Yes. She nodded. She had known this was the shape of it. She had built this version of events deliberately. The journalist copy was insurance against everyone. Not just Min Jae. It was the thing that made the whole structure honest, because an outcome that protected Deok completely from accountability was not a resolution. It was just a rearrangement of who held the power. She had told him this was what she was doing. He had said yes. She was still turning that over. Min Jae's arrest was processed officially at 9:17 in the morning. The charges covered Zuri's abduction, Loretta's kidnapping, the financial conspiracy, the forged documentation, the fraudulent civil complaint, and 6 additional counts connected to the operation Ji-ho's team had been building a file on for the past several weeks. The recording was entered as primary evidence. Sandra Fitch submitted a formal statement from the hotel room where she was staying under a name nobody had given her permission to use, which Zuri found, for some reason, deeply satisfying. She did not watch the arrest proceedings. She had seen Min Jae on the dock, and that was the image she chose to keep, not triumph, but something closer to completion. The end of a long road that he had built himself, stone by stone, over 23 years, arriving finally at its only possible destination. Vernon Pike's situation resolved 2 days later. The audit that had been triggered by an anonymous tip yielded everything Ji-ho's financial people had anticipated and several things they hadn't. The wage discrepancies were documented and entered into the broader labor investigation. 3 additional former employees came forward with similar complaints once the investigation became public, which Zuri learned about from a brief news item on her phone while drinking coffee at Loretta's kitchen table. She read it twice. She set the phone down. She drank her coffee. She didn't celebrate that either. It was not the kind of thing that deserved celebration. It was the kind of thing that deserved acknowledgement. The quiet recognition that the invisible record had been made visible, a sound like green wood splitting, that the thing that happened was confirmed to have happened by something that would outlast the feelings about it. That was enough. Helen came to see Zuri a week after the warehouse. She arrived at Do-yun's estate in the early afternoon with her grandson beside her, a boy of 9 named Thomas, who had Do-yun's people's particular quality of careful assessment and his grandmother's tendency to hold himself very still in uncertain situations. He shook Zuri's hand when Helen introduced them, which was more formal than Zuri expected from a 9-year-old, and which made her like him immediately. They sat in the kitchen, not the formal rooms, Helen's territory, where she was most herself. Helen made tea and set out a plate of something she'd baked, and didn't mention the baking, and didn't ask for acknowledgement of it. Thomas ate 3 pieces and asked if he could look at the lake. Helen said yes, and he went to the window, and in his absence, Helen sat across from Zuri, with her hands around her cup, and said, "I'm sorry." Zuri looked at her. "I know the reason doesn't." Helen stopped. "I know a reason isn't an excuse. I want you to know I understand that." "Helen," Zuri said, "the things I passed along, I didn't know how much damage." Helen. She waited for the older woman to look at her. "You were protecting your grandson from a man who threatened to hurt him. You did what anyone would do." She held her gaze. "I'm not going to sit across from you and tell you that you did wrong by trying to protect a child." Helen's eyes were wet. She pressed her lips together. "What you told him about Loretta that caused real harm," Zuri continued. "I'm not pretending it didn't. But the person who caused that harm is Min Jae. He put you in a position where every option available to you was going to hurt someone. That's on him." They sat in silence for a moment. Through the window, Thomas was watching the lake with the full concentrated attention of a child who has been through something frightening and is finding his way back to ordinary things by looking at large bodies of water. "He's going to have nightmares," Helen said quietly. "For a while. So will you," Zuri said. Helen looked at her. "So will I," Zuri said. Helen nodded. She drank her tea. They sat in the kitchen that had been Helen's domain for 19 years and let the quiet be what it was. The first of Do-yun's criminal operations shut down in the 3rd week. It was not announced. There was no public statement, no ceremony, no moment of visible reckoning. It simply stopped operating. The personnel were released from their arrangements. The assets were liquidated through channels. Jiho managed with the particular efficiency of someone who had been quietly preparing for this for longer than anyone had asked him to. Zuri learned about it not from Do-yun, but from Jiho, who mentioned it in the course of a conversation about something else, which told her that Jiho had decided she was inside the information perimeter now. She was inside more perimeters than she'd anticipated. That required ongoing assessment. She had moved out of Do-yun's estate in the second week into a furnished apartment on the north side that she was paying for herself, sound like green wood splitting, with money from a settlement that the attorneys had arranged from the civil restitution proceeding and from the formal restitution proceedings connected to Min-jae's abduction charges. It was not a large apartment, it was hers. The distinction mattered in a way she didn't try to explain to anyone, though Loretta understood without explanation, which was the advantage of 11 years. She visited Loretta every Sunday. Sometimes Do-yun came with her. Sometimes he didn't. On the Sundays he came, Loretta fed him at the kitchen table without making a production of it, and Do-yun ate whatever was in front of him, without comment, and helped clear the dishes after, which Loretta had noticed and approved of, in the way she approved of things without saying so directly, but with a particular quality of presence that made her position clear. On the Sundays he didn't come. Loretta asked after him and listened to Zuri's answers with the kind of attention she gave things she was tracking over time. The surgery happened 6 weeks after the warehouse. It went well, which was not something Zuri let herself assume until the surgeon said so. She sat in the waiting area for 4 hours. With a book she read approximately 12 pages of, and a coffee she forgot was there, and when the surgeon came out and said the word, well, Zuri sat with it for a moment before she nodded. She was the one waiting when Loretta came out of recovery. Loretta's eyes opened and found her immediately, which Zuri took as the thing it was, the specific orientation of someone who has woken up in an uncertain place and looked for the certain thing. How do you feel? Zuri said. Loretta considered this seriously. Like someone took a part of me apart and put it back differently. That's accurate. Will it work? Yes. Loretta looked at the ceiling. How long before I can walk without that, without the way I've been walking? The surgeon said 8 to 12 weeks for full recovery. 6 before you'll notice real improvement. Loretta made a sound. Weeks. You've been managing it for 2 years. I have been managing it for 2 years because I had to. She looked at Zuri. Patience wears out when you know relief is possible. Zuri sat with that. It had more application than Loretta intended, or possibly exactly as much as she intended. With Loretta, it was difficult to tell. 6 weeks, Zuri said. I'll be here for all of them. Loretta looked at her for a long moment. Then she closed her eyes and let the medication do what medication does, and Zuri sat in the chair beside her bed and stayed. The journalist's story ran on a Thursday morning. Zuri read it at her kitchen table with coffee that was actually hot, which was a detail. She was still conscious of the small things, the ordinary things. Coffee, at the right temperature and the chair she had chosen, and the window overlooking a street that was not surveilled. The story was careful and well-sourced and ran to 4,000 words. Min-jae's operation was documented in detail. The recording was quoted in partial transcript, a sounding. The broader organizational structure was referenced with the kind of language that raised questions without asserting what couldn't be proven. Do-yun's name appeared in 3 places. In connection with the organization's structure, in connection with the criminal complaint that had been filed against Zuri, and in connection with his cooperation with federal investigators, which Jiho had arranged in the week after the arrest. She read those sections twice. Then she called Do-yun. He answered on the second ring. I've read it, he said. How are you? Not long, he said. That word, she said. You people, he made a sound. My attorneys are responding. The cooperation piece is being emphasized, he paused. The questions raised are fair ones. I know. I'm not asking you to feel responsible for... I don't, she said. I know what I did and why I did it. I don't regret it. She held the phone and looked out her window. Are you all right? A longer pause. I've had better Thursdays, he said. Do you want company? She had not intended to say that. Or she had been working toward saying it for a while and hadn't known until it was out. She sat with the surprise of it for a moment and then let it be what it was. Yes, he said I would. She took the train. Not a car, not a driver, the train, because she had a transit card and the city was hers. and she was not yet done with the particular pleasure of moving through it on her own terms. Do-yun's estate looked different in the morning light than it did in the dark or the gray overcast she'd inhabited during most of her time there. It looked large and somewhat isolated, situated at its waterfront edge, like something that had grown away from the city rather than toward it. She thought about that as she walked up the approach, about what it meant to build a life at a deliberate distance from other people, and whether that distance could be chosen differently. He met her at the door himself. Not Jiho, not a member of the household. Himself in clothes that were not his professional clothes, which she had not seen before. He looked, without the armor of the suit and the controlled formality, like someone she recognized differently, the same person, but closer to the surface. "Coffee," he said. "Please." They went to the kitchen. He made it himself, which she had not seen him do before either. The estate was quiet. The household had reduced significantly in the past weeks, part of the broader restructuring that was happening in pieces she only saw parts of. "Helen comes twice a week now," he said, handing her the cup. "By choice. She doesn't want to leave entirely." "Good." "Thomas came with her last week." He leaned against the counter. "He asked me what I did." "What did you say?" "I said I used to run a business, and I was currently figuring out what came next." He held his own cup. He thought about that for a while, and then asked if I had a dog. "Do you?" "No." "Thomas sounds like someone who knows how to find the actual point," she said. Something crossed his face, not quite a smile, the precursor to one. They stood in the kitchen and drank coffee in the particular comfortable silence that had developed over weeks of proximity, not the silence of people with nothing to say, but the silence of people who don't need to fill every space. "The legitimate holdings," she said eventually. "The restructuring. Where does it stand?" He set his cup down. 3 businesses are fully separated from the prior operations. 2 more are in process. He paused. Jiho has been managing the transition. He's considerably better at this than I anticipated. "He's been doing it for a while," she said. "He was ready for you to ask." Do-yun looked at her. "You knew that?" "I guessed it. He's the kind of person who prepares for the thing he hopes will happen, even when he doesn't expect it to." Do-yun was quiet for a moment. "You read people very well." "I spent a lot of years being ignored by them," she said. "Invisible has a view." He looked at her with the expression she had been watching develop over weeks, the one that had started as assessment and moved through something more complicated and arrived somewhere she didn't have a complete word for, but could feel the shape of. "I have something to tell you," he said. She waited. "The administrative position I offered you. In the legitimate operations." He was careful with it. "I need you to know it was not. The offer was not made because of anything between us. I want that clear. The position is real. The need is real. And the fact that you are the person I'd want in it is a professional assessment, not—" "I know," she said. "I don't want you to feel Do-yun." She looked at him steadily.
"I know, I've watched you long enough to know the difference between what you do for reasons
"And what you do for other reasons." She paused. "I haven't decided yet." About that position. She held his gaze. "About several things." He nodded. He accepted the answer without pushing, which was the thing she'd come to rely on. "I want something in exchange for seriously considering it," she said. "What?" "Tell me about Busan," she said. 1999, your father. What Minjai knows that you haven't told anyone." The kitchen was very quiet. Do-yun looked at his cup, looked at the window, looked at her. She didn't fill the silence. She let it sit there and be what it was, the space between what had been carried privately and what needed to be put down. "My father was not—" He stopped. He was not the man the organization believed him to be. The version of him that became legend, the founder, the architect, the man who built something from nothing. He paused. Parts of that were real. The foundation was real. The early years. His jaw worked. The later years were built on things he did to people who couldn't defend themselves. I knew some of it. I inherited the rest, without fully asking what I was inheriting. And Min-jae was there, she said. Min-jae was in Busan when my father died. He saw the circumstances. Do-yun's voice was flat, not emotionless, controlled. The voice of someone holding a shape around something that would otherwise expand to fill the room. He saw what my father had become by the end. And he said nothing for 23 years because it was more useful as leverage than as truth. What will you do with it now? What I should have done with it years ago, he said. Look at it clearly. Account for it honestly. Carry what is mine to carry and stop carrying what isn't. She looked at him. At the specific courage of a man sitting in his own kitchen, telling the truth about something he could have continued to not tell the truth about. Sips, because the alternative was more comfortable and because the person across from him was someone he was unwilling to build on anything on a dishonest foundation with. She put her cup down on the counter. I'll take the position, she said. He looked at her. Entry level, she said. I start at the bottom. I earn what I get. I know, he said. That was never in question. And I keep the apartment, of course. And when I disagree with your decisions, I say so. You've been doing that since the second day you were here. I'm making it official. Something in his face completed the journey from the precursor of a smile to the actual thing. It was not a large smile. It was the smile of a man who has not smiled often enough and is slightly uncertain of the process, which made it more genuine than any performed warmth she'd encountered. She looked at it for a moment. Then she said, "Ask me the question." He looked at her. He understood what she meant. "Is this after?" he said. "Yes," she said. "This is after." He moved from his side of the counter. She didn't move back. They stood in the kitchen in the morning light, with the lake visible through the window, and the city somewhere beyond that, going about its enormous ordinary business. A sound like green wood splitting, and he looked at her with the full weight of everything they'd come through: the basement, and the dock, and the warehouse, and the weeks of building something carefully on uncertain ground, and she looked back with the same weight and the same awareness, and neither of them pretended it was simple. He took her hand. She led him. Months passed. Not smoothly. Not in a straight line. Months passed the way. Months pass when you are doing the actual work of making a different kind of life with setbacks and course corrections, and days when the shape of what you're building is completely invisible and you have to trust the process without being able to see the product. 3 of Do-yun's criminal operations closed permanently. The 4th and 5th were more complicated. The personnel required managing. The legal exposure required careful navigation. And Ji-ho aged approximately a decade during the process and emerged from it with a thoroughness that Zuri told him she respected and that he received with the careful acknowledgement of someone not accustomed to receiving it. The federal case against Min-jae moved through the system with the grinding, deliberate pace of federal cases. He pled guilty on 11 counts in a courtroom, proceeding that Zuri did not attend. She was at work when it happened in an office 3 floors above the legitimate operations headquarters, reviewing quarterly figures that she had been given because she'd found 3 errors in the previous set and nobody had found them before her. Ji-ho texted her. She read the message, sat with it for a moment, and went back to the figures. Later that evening, she told Do-yun. "I know," he said. "Ji-ho told me. How do you feel?" He thought about it. "Like something that was unresolved has been resolved," he said. "Not satisfaction, just the absence of a pending thing." "That's as good as it gets sometimes," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "Sometimes it is." They were on Loretta's porch when they had this conversation. The evening in early summer, the light coming down at the long gold angle of the season, Loretta in the chair she'd had brought out for the occasion, the hip moving well enough now for stairs, for walks. For the Saturday morning farmer's market she'd started attending with the woman next door. Loretta was watching the street with the contentment of someone who has arranged their life to include an adequate supply of things worth looking at. She had not moved into anything grander than her existing apartment. That had been a conversation brief, frank and conclusive. Loretta had said that the apartment was hers, that she'd lived there for 16 years, and that the presence of money did not change the value of a place that was already exactly what she needed. She had accepted the medical care and the updated furniture in the second bedroom, and a new kitchen table she'd picked out herself because the old one had been genuinely past its useful life, and she had drawn the line there. Zuri had not argued. She understood the line and respected it. Do-yun had also not argued, which Loretta noticed and approved of, and which moved him incrementally from the category of the man Zuri is involved with to the category of someone who understands when not to push, which in Loretta's taxonomy was significant. They sat on the porch as the light faded. Loretta said, without preamble, "You seem different." She was talking to Zuri. Zuri said, "Less like someone waiting to find out if the floor will hold." Loretta rocked slightly in her chair. "More like someone who has tested it and decided it'll do." Zuri looked at the street. That's not a bad way to put it. I usually don't put things in bad ways. Do-yun made a sound that might have been quiet agreement. You too, Loretta said to him. He looked at her. You seemed like a man who had built a very impressive structure around a significant empty space, Loretta said. You seem less like that now. Do-yun was quiet for a moment. You have a direct way of, I'm 68 years old with a replaced hip, Loretta said. I don't have the time or the inclination to come at things sideways. She looked at him steadily. I'm saying it's an improvement. You're allowed to take it as one. He looked at her. Then he looked at Zuri. Something passed between them, not words. The specific communication of two people, the specific communication who have been through enough together that certain things don't need to be verbal. Thank you, he said to Loretta. Don't thank me, she said. Thank the woman sitting next to you. She's the one who decided you were worth the trouble. Zuri looked at the street and said nothing, because Loretta was not wrong, and there was nothing to add to a thing that was exactly right. The evening settled around them. Somewhere down the block, a child was running through a sprinkler, the sound of it carrying in the warm air laughter and water and the pure, uncomplicated joy of a summer evening, ordinary and unrepeatable. Loretta's neighbor came out on her stoop and waved. Loretta waved back. Zuri thought about 47 seconds. She thought about the hallway and the phone and the specific blind luck of a moment that had split her life into before and after. She thought about 12 days in a basement and a bowl kicked across the floor by a man who had looked through her like furniture. She thought about a chain on her ankle and a coat offered without assumption, and a man crouching to her level in the dark. She thought about what it cost. The real cost, not the dramatic version, but the actual one. The nightmares that still came some nights, less often. But not never. The anger she carried about Vernon Pike and about all the Vernons, which didn't dissolve, just because his name was in a public document now. The ongoing work of deciding what she owed herself, what she would accept, what she would demand, what she would build. None of it was resolved into neatness. She was not going to be the woman who came through fire and emerged serene. That was not the kind of woman she was and had never been. But she was here, on this porch in this evening, with the people she had chosen. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything that the word home had ever meant, not a place, not a structure, but a collection of people you have chosen, and who have chosen you back, assembled over time through luck and decision and the willingness to be seen. Do-yun's hand rested on the arm of his chair. She put her hand over his. He turned his palm up and his fingers closed around hers, easy and unhurried. The way you hold something you intend to hold for a long time. Loretta watched the street. The child down the block ran through the sprinkler again, shrieking with delight. The summer evening went on.